Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Actually, welcome back to this is the relaunch, the official relaunch of the Science from the Fringe podcast. My name is Bryce Nichols. I'm a professor of genetics at Rutgers University, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Michael Nevradakis. Michael is a senior reporter for The Defender, which is Children's Health Defense's online news platform. Now, you hold a PhD in media studies from the University of Texas and a master's in public policy from Stony Brook. You also, it says that you taught at various universities in Greece and the US. Is that correct? You're actually a lecturer?
That's correct. I do part-time teaching in my academic field. It's a very interesting contrast to the work that I do with The Defender, but one also complements the other because through my academic background, I've been exposed to, reading countless academic papers and scientific papers. And even though I'm not in a field that's in the hard sciences, most academic papers, most scientific papers are organized in the same way. They have the same format that is sort of generally accepted in academia. So if you know how to navigate one of those types of papers, that helps you regardless of what field that you're in. And that's my response, or one of my responses to all of these really like ludicrous criticisms that I oftentimes come across when I see people online commenting on my work or on the other writer, the work of the other writers at The Defender who are also PhDs in fields that are similar to mine. Uh, I've seen things like, "Oh, you're not a doctor. These people are, that write for The Defender are not medical professionals." Y- y- you don't have to be a medical professional to understand certain basic things about health and science. You don't need to have a degree in physics to understand a certain, how to interpret a scientific paper. And it's interesting to me that these sorts of people never make the same criticisms when, for instance, Bill Gates says something about vaccines or some other scientific topic because he doesn't have a scientific degree. I'm not sure he has any degree. So, that's my background, and that's kind of how I respond to people's comments about my background.
You are coming out of the gate hot, defending yourself against critics. I was going to say, I appreciate that you come from sort of a distinct background and bring a fresh perspective to these issues. Because sadly, as you know, a lot of the, credentialed people sort of got a lot of the stuff and, certainly during COVID wrong. So yeah, you also are joining us tonight from Greece, right? So I appreciate it's quite late, so I appreciate you staying up and doing this interview with me. But you get a lot of crap from. So I'm a professor, right, at Rutgers. Are there a lot of professors that sort of just try to deplatform you or undermine your reporting by just saying that you don't know what you're talking? Is that who? Is it my colleagues that you're talking about that attack you sometimes?
Mostly it is, or at least, sometimes I don't know who these people are. I see things on X or on other platforms. I've had some issues in the past, fortunately not currently. Um, I'm also not very active on social media, so in a sense, it kind of insulates me from some perhaps more direct attacks, maybe because in that sense, I'm a little bit, harder to find. I have actually, since this has come up, I do attend academic conferences in my field from time to time, and I had this amusing experience last year in London where I went to a conference where I was presenting a paper, and it was a paper that was just on topics that are completely unrelated to what I do at The Defender or what we're going to talk about today. But at that same conference, there were a lot of papers and there were some panels on so-called misinformation, disinformation. And one of them was a presentation on someone's study on CHD as a purveyor of vaccine misinformation. And I was there and I sat in the back and I was keeping a very low profile. And I was just following the presentation. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't make any comments. I didn't ask any questions, but I did take notes, and that turned into a story that I later wrote. But it was sort of like this intersection of my two jobs at that conference, and I wasn't expecting it.
I guess, yeah, that's the thing. I know that Children's Health, what is it? Children's Health Defense? Is that yeah, that's the name of the, but that is certainly is, yeah. often attacked, especially by people relate on sort of issues related to vaccines. The other thing they're attacked on, I think, too, is the subject of our topic today, which is somebody who I think maybe both of us have a similar opinion of, which is Anthony Fauci. So do you want to give us a little bit of a overview on, I guess you've covered Anthony Fauci for the Defender over the years. Can you give me a sort of a general overview of your reporting on him? And I'd also kind of like you to tell me how you felt about Anthony Fauci before you started reporting on him and how you feel about him now.
Well, that's a good question, Bryce. I've been reporting on Fauci ever since I joined the Defender, initially as a part-time writer, and it's actually 4 years ago next month. And obviously, a lot has changed in some ways since then, and some other things have not really changed very much at all. But when I think back to when I first started writing, that there were still all sorts of mandates that were in place all over in different parts of the world, and certainly in the U.S. And the COVID narrative was still very strong. It was still in the first 9, 10 months after the COVID shots became, available to the public. And obviously now, not necessarily what we know, because I think you or I or a lot of people in this orbit knew a lot of these things, or at least had certain feelings about these things from very early on with COVID. But in the 4 years that have passed since then, we've seen so many scientific papers come out. We've seen so many research findings come out on all sorts of things, including, of course, the adverse events that are connected to the COVID shots. That sort of information was just not available in nearly the same quantity in 2020, 2021, even if we anecdotally knew that there were problems with what was going on, even if we had a bad feeling about what was going on. So, this partially answers the second part of your question, which is that even before I started writing for The Defender, and going all the way back to before the lockdowns and all of those measures started being implemented in March of 2020, I was I was not a fan of Fauci. As soon as his name and everything that he was saying started making it into the news cycle early in 2020, I was getting a very bad feeling about where this was going. And I'm not saying this to make myself sound like a know-it-all, because I know there were a lot of people that kind of got a very similar sort of bad feeling about what was to come. But my sense was from around March of 2020, as soon as they started saying, well, we're going to need to lock down for 2 weeks to stop the spread, and all of that other nonsense that they were talking about then, I was telling people just in my private sphere, because I wasn't writing for an outlet like The Defender then, that it's not going to be 2 weeks. They're not going through all of this trouble, all of this, huge, essentially PR campaign to get people to buy into these measures for something that's going to just end in 2 weeks. They seemed ridiculously well prepared. I have an anecdotal example that I like to share, and which I also did share in a book chapter that I wrote for was a book called Canary in a COVID World, which came out last year, about a year ago. Uh, I live in Greece, and I remember March of 2020, just before the lockdowns were imposed, because they were done almost simultaneously in every country, or almost every country. There's a pharmacy in my neighborhood, and I had gone to it, and I think it was a Friday, and went in. I had to get something, and then by that Sunday or Monday, I passed by that pharmacy again, and they had replaced the front door of the pharmacy with one of those doors that had like a slot that opened up so that the pharmacist would be inside and sort of hand someone that is out on the street, a small package, like, a box of medication, through that little slot. And this was before the lockdown was introduced. So what that told me is that there were people that had foreknowledge that this was coming. For some reason, they must, managed to keep as quiet as possible about it. They must have all been somehow sworn to secrecy. I don't know through what process. And a lot of people just accepted, uh, the lockdown when it came, and all of the other measures that followed. And when all of this, propaganda started coming out, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and stay home, stay safe. And most countries had like almost exact translations of that rhetoric. Like in Greece, they had the same slogans that's translated into Greek. I was saying, no, this is not going to be 2 weeks. They're probably going to go for vaccine mandates within the next year. They want to they're probably going to introduce some kind of digital pass because they want to get people used to digital ID. And as it turns out, both of those things happened. And I'm not saying that again to make myself sound like I'm the smartest person in the room, but I think because I was already inclined to um, not be so trusting of authorities that come out and make a big show about wanting to do things for our own good. Living in Greece, I had heard that story before in a different context during the Greek financial crisis. They were coming in and saying, oh, well, if we cut your salaries and we cut your pensions, but we don't cut military spending, it's going to be for your own good. And the country's going to return to growth in a year. And then when the country didn't return to growth in 1 year, they said, well, we need to cut your salary some more, and we need to cut this and cut that. And we promise that next year the country will be booming. And that didn't happen. And it was this vicious cycle that went on for a decade. And when you live through things like that, you begin to understand that when you're told that something is being done for your own good, or it's being done in a so-called public interest, those are just buzzwords to get people to buy into something that they probably wouldn't otherwise be willing to accept. So based on that experience, I I was just, shaking my head no and saying, no, they have something up their sleeve that goes beyond just, some virus. And this was a time where I was not doing any sort of writing on these topics. I was personally interested in them, but I was not, I wasn't writing for the Defender yet, but I wasn't writing for anyone else about these topics either. That opportunity came later.
What was your first article about Fauci?
I'll be honest, I can't remember what the very first one was, and there's been so many over the years that it's kind of all kind of blended together into this big soup about, all of the wonderful things that Fauci has done or has allegedly done.
Will he ever be held accountable for anything? And perhaps, is there something to hold him accountable for? Your your recent writing suggests that there is, in fact, something to hold him accountable for, at least one thing, which is uh, perjury.
Well, there's some interesting things going on, and I've done a lot of reporting on the topic. I will say, by the way, I should just mention that, whatever I'm saying is my own personal opinion and, not necessarily that of CHD. Um, but I've done a lot of reporting recently that has to do with an investigation that Senator Paul from Tennessee has launched that has to do
Kentucky.
from
Kentucky.
Kentucky.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I know it's late. Look, it's
Not just
late.
late.
And
I had an email just before we connected, from that had to do with Tennessee, so that kind of stuck in my mind. So Senator Paul from Kentucky, who's going to be at the CHD conference this year, from what I've been told, which is in a couple of months, has been investigating COVID's origins. So as part of that investigation, he has requested records from Anthony Fauci, and he has been looking into uh, phone calls, emails, documents that they have been able to uncover through this investigation. And I have to assume that they've probably also been able to get documents that have come from other congressional investigations that were going on in the previous congressional term. Um, a lot of these emails date back to 2020, and a lot of these documents. And what some of them have shown, for instance, is that Fauci was interacting with several very big names in global public health, including Jeremy Farrar, who was the head of an organization known as the Wellcome Trust back then. He then later joined the WHO and is now one of their assistant secretaries. So he has a very high position there. Um, so Fauci was interacting with people like this, with Francis Collins, who under the Biden administration was the head of the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and with key virologists who were doing research on coronaviruses. And what these documents showed was that there was a series of emails, calls, etc., where Fauci and some of these other individuals that I named were trying to get these virologists who were working on a paper about COVID's origins on board with the theory that SARS-CoV-2, the virus responsible for COVID, emerged not from a lab leak, not from a lab accident or anything like that, but through natural, or what they call zoonotic, origins. And there were actually a couple of virologists that were part of those interactions that were expressing in these private conversations that they were having on platforms like Slack and in some emails and so forth. They were at the very least expressing some doubts regarding the story that COVID had a natural origin. They were willing to at least entertain the notion that this might have been a result of a lab leak. And Fauci was, and the other sort of like key public health figures I mentioned, were able to sort of get them to backtrack from that. These virologists ended up authoring a paper that is widely known as the Proximal Origin paper. It was published in, I believe, Nature Medicine, a major journal, uh, in March of 2020, if I remember correctly. So very early on in the pandemic, and became one of the most cited papers in recent years, most cited scientific papers. And it was also the paper that Fauci then used as a reference point in many of his public proclamations about COVID, including at least one statement he made right from the White House back then. I think it was in April of 2020, where he said there's actually this new paper that's come out, peer reviewed, and all of that, that tells us that COVID could not have emerged from a lab, and it has all of the characteristics of having come out of nature, essentially. So Rand Paul's investigation has found, and I think some other prior congressional investigations have found a lot of these documents. So in July of this year, and again more recently, within the last few weeks, uh, Rand Paul has asked Fauci to provide more documents, including all communication that he had with a series of virologists, public health figures, scientists that were involved in what is known as gain of function research in the US and also in China, including at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where some people believe the virus may have leaked from. A whole host of documents, phone calls, text messages, phone logs, all of these sorts of things. And in Paul's most recent communication to Fauci earlier this month, he also asked Fauci to state his availability um, for several different time windows. I guess when Congress and Rand Paul's committee are available for Fauci to come in and testify. Now, I will clarify that this was not a subpoena, and Senator Paul's office also clarified this to me as well. It's not a subpoena, at least not yet. We don't know if one is going to follow, because we don't know if Fauci has responded to this yet or not, and how he has responded. But Fauci has been invited at this point to testify before the end of the year, before the Senate. And it's part, again, of this investigation that has been ongoing about the origins of COVID. Now, it's important to make that distinction as well. It's not an investigation against Fauci per se. It's an investigation against, that's aiming to sort of find out what, not just what the origins of COVID are, but also if there were any government cover-ups involved in relation to this topic. Um, and that is a way potentially from, based on legal experts that I've interviewed several times over the past year, that might be a way to get Fauci to come into Congress and testify. And I say that because, as you and your audience may remember, in the final moments, literally the final minutes of the Biden administration in January, then President Biden issued a so-called preemptive pardon against Fauci. It's a pardon that retroactively dates back to the 1st of January 2014, and provides him with this sort of immunity for anything that Fauci did in all of the official capacities that he held from that period and up until the day of the pardon. So that includes his role as the head of NIAID, the head of sort of like the White House COVID commission early in the pandemic, all of the official roles that he held in public health during that period. So, so, that raised a lot of eyebrows. People, legal scholars and legal experts that I spoke to could only refer back to maybe one instance in the past where a president has issued a preemptive pardon. So this is not something that has really been done a lot and has really been tested legally. But assuming that the pardon stands, and I know that all of these other things have been heard in recent months about, oh, did Biden really sign it? Was it an auto pan controlled by someone else that signed it? We haven't really covered that in the Defender, and kind of it remains to be seen what will happen, if anything, regarding that issue. But let's assume that the preemptive pardon remains in place. What lawyers and legal experts told me is that that doesn't insulate Fauci against being called to testify before Congress. If he comes before Congress and testifies, he's not insulated against perjury. So it's what you mentioned earlier in your question. So remember that Fauci has previously provided statements to Congress. Last year he did a 2-day closed door interview with the House of Representatives. I think, if I remember correctly, because there's been so many of these, that was the interview where he said he didn't recall about 100 times to all sorts of different questions about what he was doing during that period of time early in the pandemic, and just before it. And so, he can't perjure himself now. If he does, his preemptive pardon will not protect him against fresh charges of perjury. And, that's a risk that he's facing. At the same time, even though this is kind of a tangent to what you asked, but it bears mentioning as well, state attorney generals, if they are so inclined, could also file their own charges against Fauci. And the federal pardon that he received from President Biden won't protect him there. So Fauci's not out of the woods, not entirely anyway. Whether or not that leads to something substantial taking place with Senator Paul's investigation, I don't know. I'd like to think that, something, substantial can come out of this that might also go beyond Fauci to other people that clearly were involved in everything that was happening early in the pandemic and with all of this gain of function research that was taking place in the years prior to that. But it remains to be seen whether Rand Paul can carry this alone, whether there's going to be enough support in the Senate for, taking some more substantial action against Fauci. It remains to be seen what Fauci is going to say if he does testify, um, especially in light of things that he has previously told Congress, if he's going to find clever ways to sort of answer questions to avoid the possibility of a perjury charge. From what I've been told, I hope I'm not wrong because I'm basing this just on what legal experts told me, and I'm not a legal expert. I was told he can't even plead the fifth. Um, don't take my word for it 100%. But it seems that, the bottom line is whatever testimony Fauci delivers in Congress will be interesting and kind of unique because of all of these, additional variables like the preemptive pardon.
Now, can Senator Paul compel him to testify? He can issue a subpoena, correct?
From what I understand, he can. He hasn't done it yet. They may be just following the process, which involves inviting Fauci to turn over these documents that have been requested and inviting him to testify. He has a deadline to do it until September 25th. If he doesn't do it by then, it'll be interesting to see what the next steps will be from Senator Paul.
Did you want to talk about your reporting that you did, the article that came out September 11th, where you talk about these emails where he's instructing some of his colleagues to delete the messages that he's sending after they read them?
Yes, Fauci had previously said under oath that he had not deleted records, and he I don't remember the exact quote, but he also said something to the effect of, he didn't instruct others to do so, or he didn't participate in the deletion of these sorts of federal records. So emails, for instance, when they're sent to someone's official, federal email account, are considered federal records. And the revelations that Senator Paul came out with earlier this month, that he published them on his account on X, showed two examples of emails that were both from 2020, where Fauci told others to delete those emails as soon as they received them, and those people were also in the federal government. So he was instructing other federal employees to delete federal documents, in this case, emails that were sent from official .gov email addresses. So not only does that contradict what Fauci previously told Congress, but in and of itself, it's also a violation of other regulations that have to do with the destruction of federal documents as well. So that could be an issue for Fauci going forward as well.
Can he just claim that those were sarcastic statements, for example, or dismiss them as, well, obviously, I was I was being facetious? Won't that get him out of this? Or am I just being very cynical based on the fact that it doesn't seem like anyone has the, anyone my concern here is that maybe I'll be very blunt. It seems like a lot of people's are getting a lot of good PR, and they're even making their careers out of criticizing Fauci. And so it might actually work against them if Fauci's ever held accountable, because then they can't actually get to complain about him not being held accountable. So is there am I being too cynical about this, or do do you think that this is going to matter?
It might matter. I suppose it depends on how seriously the Senate, not necessarily just Rand Paul, but the Senate in general, wants to pursue this line of inquiry. I suppose I'm not a lawyer, and I certainly don't know what Fauci's lawyers, and I know he has legal counsel that he hired soon after leaving his NIAID position. I don't know what they will advise him to do and what they think would be best for him to say in that situation. I would imagine that even if he said something along the lines of, "Oh, I was only joking," he might then get a follow-up question along the lines of, "Well, we have all of these emails from you, and the only ones where you actually happen to say that are on, these particular topics." I'm just speculating, this might not end up happening, but I'm just saying that, if Fauci wants to respond in that manner, I would have to imagine that Senator Paul and other senators will be prepared for that possibility and might, then confront him with other emails, uh, where he didn't say those things, but they might be on other topics, or they might not be as sensitive, in terms of their content. Who knows?
I just get a sense that people in positions of power that can, in fact, hold him accountable and have not necessarily Senator Paul, because he's been spearheading these efforts, but a lot of people have said a lot of things publicly about Anthony Fauci, and my impression is that they're in positions where there could be something that they do to really hold him accountable for various things, but nothing ever happens. And I understand there's a pardon, but as you said, that's to be tested legally there. And I guess perhaps I should have a legal scholar on to get into that. I don't know. I would just, do you think, I mean, based on, do you think he should be held accountable? Should he spend time in, should he face some sort of, I'm not going to say what the penalty should be, but do you think that he should be held accountable for things that he's done, or let bygones be bygones? Just your opinion, not the opinion of the defender or anything.
Right, just as my personal opinion, I can just go by all of the documents and everything that I've seen that is certifiably connected to, Fauci, his emails, other documents with his name on them, things that he said publicly, of course, in 2020, and that he said repeatedly and that he stood by. I think just based on that sort of documentation and those sorts of statements alone, he should be held accountable. And not just Fauci. I mean, a lot of people like to, hold up Fauci as the bad guy or the villain. But if we want to sort of, you know, see him in that sort of light, there's others that also played important roles in this, in this whole situation, not just Fauci. It's not like Fauci did the world's entire COVID response. And there was a whole apparatus, whether we look at who was in other federal health agencies at that time, um, to, the WHO, to, key politicians and public health officials in other countries. I wrote a story about a year or year and a half ago, for instance, about leaked messages that came from UK government ministers and public health experts. They were exchanging these messages on WhatsApp of all things. And they were very clearly not even believing their own public statements about COVID, about social distancing, about masking, very similar to statements that Fauci later cynically admitted. He told Congress, for instance, last year that there was no scientific basis for 6 feet of social distancing. He said something along the lines, it was a number that they kind of just came up with, for lack of a better way of explaining it. There was no, scientific study that said it should be 6 feet and not 5 feet or 10 feet or whatever. They just came up with a number. There really wasn't any study at all, just as, there's so many studies, including a Cochrane analysis or meta-analysis on masks, um, that have shown that masks are not the sort of effective pandemic stopping tool that so many people, including Fauci, were telling us they were. Um, so between the fact that Fauci came out and told the public that, there's this proximal origin paper that tells us essentially beyond any doubt that COVID emerged naturally, when in fact we saw that he was not only, aware of evidence that it may not have emerged naturally, but also working with scientists at the laboratory where it may have come from. I think that sort of evidence is enough to hold people like Fauci accountable, but it shouldn't stop there. And again, this is just my personal opinion. And it's notable to point out that when Biden issued that preemptive pardon, he did issue one to Fauci, but he didn't issue one to other public health officials that were, either in the Biden administration or in the first Trump administration during the early days of COVID. It was just Fauci that got that protection. So there's a lot of others out there that are, if you want to look at it from this perspective, are ripe for the picking from a legal standpoint. But nothing seems to have happened to them yet. That doesn't mean nothing will happen in the future, but so far we haven't seen much at all happen.
I did want to ask you about another article that you published on your Substack that's related to Anthony Fauci. And in particular, it's about the person who is now the acting director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or infectious disease. I think it's just singular, which is abbreviated NIAID. And that's a man named Jeffrey Taubenberger.
Jeffrey Taubenberger is not the household name that Anthony Fauci became, even though he is the acting director of the same agency that Dr. Fauci led for 38 years. So Taubenberger is in the same position within the current administration that Fauci was in, all of the administrations he previously served in as NIA director for almost 40 years. Now, in and of itself, that doesn't tell us much. What tells us a little bit more is that Taubenberger, and this was the sort of like the main focus of the story that I wrote and that we published, is that he has previously supported and quite publicly gain of function research. Now, gain of function research, without getting too technical, is a type of research that has been, by if you ask proponents of the so-called lab leak theory that COVID or SARS-CoV-2 emerged from a lab, um, they will also tell you that they believe that the virus was essentially enhanced in its ability to, essentially be better at infecting people and better at sort of spreading from person to person. Well, that sort of enhancement is a product of gain of function research. And Taubenberger has supported in public statements this sort of research. And not only that, and you could see where the two could possibly be related to each other. He has written uh, scientific articles and also letters that were published in scientific publications where he defended the natural origin hypothesis of COVID. In fact, he co-authored an op-ed that was published in a journal called the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. This was back in 2020. He co-authored this op-ed that was published in that journal that suggested that COVID, or the virus that's responsible for COVID, emerged naturally. So it didn't come from a lab. And he co-wrote that, by the way, with a close associate of Fauci's by the name of Dr. David Morans. And Morans has faced accusations, not to go off on a tangent, but it's relevant to what we were just talking about. He has also been accused of deleting federal records, emails, and so forth. So we're beginning to see a pattern with some of these individuals, right? And then you have Taubenberger, he has publicly supported gain of function research. He publicly defended people that worked with scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. Those people include a zoologist by the name of Peter Daszak, who was the former president of what is known as the EcoHealth Alliance, that was banned last year by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from getting any more grants from that agency. Taubenberger has defended Daszak and his this is an exact quote, his Chinese colleagues, referring to the scientists at the Wuhan lab. Well, if someone has defended people that were allegedly involved with gain of function research, and that same person then comes out and says, no, I don't think COVID came from a lab, I think it emerged naturally, you can see where there's a conflict of interest there, where, there's, no incentive for them to say, well, maybe COVID could have come from a lab, because then that opens the door to calling into question the very type of scientific research that they have publicly supported, including in, journal articles and in scientific publications. So that's who Taubenberger is. And you may note that not much has been heard about him in recent months. So he hasn't had the profile that Fauci has previously had, even though he holds the same position that Fauci used to hold.
I wanted to also point out he was instrumental in the reconstruction of the 1918 Spanish flu, which killed, tens of millions of people. It was extinct from the planet, and he initiated efforts to sequence the genome by isolating the virus from, people that were, had died and had their bodies in the frozen tundra, I believe, thinking that this was sort of a basic research project to like, hey, let's bring back the 1918 flu virus and see, do some experiments with it to see what it's like compared to modern day flu viruses, which is an insane, just simply an reckless and irresponsible experiment. I mean, it is essentially gain of function. I mean, you're just creating something that doesn't exist, that could potentially wipe out, millions of people, and doing it without anybody outside of your own little orbit's input. Anyway, with that, I guess, is there a final thing I'd like to ask you is are you working on anything right now related to COVID cover up, Fauci or whatnot? Or is there, is there any other big stories you're about to break?
There's nothing specific yet about Fauci. We're waiting to see if he's going to respond to Senator Paul's letter and what sort of the substance of that response will be, and we'll kind of take it from there. Hopefully, whatever follows from this, we'll be able to get some important information from Senator Paul's office as well that we could, help, then share with our audience. But there's nothing specific yet. We're just waiting to see where that's going to go and where other related investigations will also go. I'll quickly mention, since we talked about Proximal Origin earlier, there's an investigation against the editor of that journal, who published that supposedly peer-reviewed paper, and that editor was himself quite vocal on social media in favor of the natural origin theory of the COVID virus. So, we might see in the coming weeks and months some more news in that direction. I'll say that in recent days.
Wait, are you promising that there'll be a break in that?
Oh no, I can't. I would expect there would be. I can't promise it though because I'm not basing it on any information other than the fact that these are ongoing investigations, and some of them have been ongoing for a while.
I guess I have a strong opinion about that too, Michael. I wasn't intending to, but we both agree that Fauci should face accountability, and Taubenberger is a bad choice for NIAID, I think, right?
That's what it looks like, and, it'll be interesting to see what the next few weeks and months will bring us because Fauci does have this deadline, from Senator Paul to respond, so what will follow after that deadline is something we'll probably know fairly soon. Um, if he does testify before the end of the year, as he has been invited so far to do, not subpoenaed, but invited, it'll be interesting to see what sorts of answers Fauci gives and how he will try to reconcile past statements of his with what has been found in all of these documents and emails and so forth.
Right. Okay, well, with that, we hope that we both are in agreement. We hope Fauci faces some level of accountability, and he'll go down and history will reflect his sort of true role in a lot of the issues with, public health that emerged certainly in the wake of COVID. And um, but we shall see. We shall see. But anyway, thanks once again, Michael, for joining me today and for staying up super late to do this interview with me. I very much appreciate it. I had a great time chatting with you, and I hope we can do this again sometime. Until until the next interview, I'm always bad with ending this thing. I don't. You were a podcast host. What was your sign off on these things? How did you sign off? I need like a way to do it properly.
I think I just wrapped it up with, just by saying where people could find more of the sort of content, basically.
Oh,
So,
okay.
if I could
Well, I
if I
don't
could
know
plug,
yet. Well, do
well,
you
if I
want to
could
plug
just
anything?
yeah.
Where can they find you? You should plug something, and then I'll plug whatever I'm going to plug.
Well, I'll plug the Defender. We're at children'shealthdefense.org/defender. Of course, you can visit the main Children's Health Defense website as well, and from there, you'll also find the CHD-TV and all of the other endeavors that Children's Health Defense is involved in. And we're on Substack as well, since we mentioned that earlier. It's the letter T, Defender, so tdefender.substack.com. Essentially, right now, it's replicating the content that's in the regular online version of the Defender, but it's just reaching a wider audience there. Perhaps in the future, we'll be able to build on that content, but for now, it's the same type of, it's the same stories, whether you go to our website or go to our Substack. They're, the same stories, the same journalism are available on both sources. And then if you go to children'shealthdefense.org, you can find CHD TV and all our weekly lineup of programs and interviews there.
And they can donate, right? People can donate to help support the development of content, right?
Absolutely. Anyone can donate to CHD and its efforts. Um, they can become a regular supporter of CHD as well. They can contribute in other ways as well. We have a community forum that is open to people's submissions if they wish to write something on one of the types of topics that we tend to cover at CHD and at the Defender. So there's a lot of ways for people to get involved. I know there's some rallies coming up in support of Secretary Kennedy, and CHD has been helping to promote those as well. So there's a lot of ways in which people can participate.
Okay, well, great. Well, thanks a lot. And I guess likewise, people can find this. Well, it's on Science from the Fringe, Substack, YouTube, Twitter, whatnot. Until next time, I'm Bryce Nichols. Thank you all for joining us.